Hey friends, it's Lauren Taylor. Thank you so much for joining me in my craft room today. I'm excited to share with you the brand new clear stamp and die kit of the month from Spellbinders and all of their monthly clubs. This is the beautiful floral stamp set. I love how large and just how easy this is going to be to color, and so many wonderful sentiments in this like two different font, like scripty and all capital fonts. I love that. And I love that everything has its own die. Sentiment dies just make me so happy in life. It's just a great joy. And then the large floral image actually has two dies. So you can completely cut it out with both of these large kind of border looking dies, or you can just cut out for a partial die cut. So just one side of the floral. So I'm going to come up with three cards. They're going to be very similar, but I want to show different ways you can style with those dies. So I have these three pieces of watercolor cardstock and I trim them down to fit pretty much perfectly to my floral stamp. And I have my Misty here with my Clearly Amazing mat just to make sure that my cardstock stays in place. And I use the magnets mostly to help keep that Clearly Amazing mat inside of my Misty. I'm doing three different colors for my stamping. First, I'm going to stamp with Shady Lane VersaFine Clair ink. I also have Pinecone and Onyx black, but I'm going to go ahead and just show you one stamping. I do stamp it twice to get a nice, clean, crisp stamped image. And I'm going to use some clear embossing powder to emboss my image. What I love about VersaFine Clair inks is that they stamp so beautifully and perfectly after only one stamp usually. Now this is textured watercolor cardstock, so I did stamp twice, and it's embossable. So embossable, is that a word? You can emboss with it. So I went ahead and covered my whole image with that clear embossing powder and used my heat gun to melt the powder down, and you get this beautiful floral image. So I repeated that process with the pine cone, and then I stamped with the black, the onyx black, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to do gold. So embossed with gold embossing powder. So it's not like a perfect bright shiny gold. It has a little bit of that black kind of undertone to it because of the ink, but I really liked how it turned out. Next, I'm going to color all of my images, but I'm just going to show you one on camera because I color them all the same. And I'm using my distressed watercolor crayons from Tim Holtz and Ranger ink. And I have them in color order. So I don't know what sets these are from because I have all three and I arranged them in color order. So it was just easy for me to grab, greens that look nice together and yellows that look nice together. So just use what you have. If you have other watercolor pencils or crayons, this is an easy, task that you can do. I'm just picking up the ink with my water brush pen. So it's like a kind of like a paintbrush, as a little brush at the end, but my pen, the part that I'm holding onto, is a like water container. I'm sure you've seen these, but I just wanted to explain what it was in case you haven't. And you just lightly squeeze the brush pen in order to release some of that water into the brush. So I'm picking up the ink or the watercolor from the pencil and then applying it to the paper. I've just found this to be the best way for me to color with these types of watercolors. I have just added color down onto the paper with a pencil and then added water, and I just didn't like it. I felt like I couldn't get a nice blend. So this is just the way that I found works best for me. I wanted my flowers to be yellow, so I'm using some of this kind of, I think that might even be wild honey. I don't remember the colors off the top of my head, but an orangey yellow and then kind of like fade into a lighter yellow. So I'm using this orange color and both yellows from the three different watercolor pencil distress sets. And once I have the color combination I like, I'm going to go through and color all the petals at the same time. I just did one flower here, but you'll see next I'm going to go ahead and just start with one color at a time so I don't have to clean off my brush as often. This is just like a little microfiber cloth that I have next to me that I use to wipe my brush and just kind of clean off while I'm changing in between the colors. So I have that kind of rusty orange, I think it's wild honey, to be the darkest part of my flower, and then I believe it's, oh, I don't know the yellows. This one's Squeeze Lemonade, I'm pretty sure. I really should have just kept these next to me. I'm sorry if you need the specific colors, but the two yellows from the watercolor set. So I'm just trying to blend between those three so the flowers just have a little bit more dimension and texture to them. It does dry back a little bit, so I wanted this first flower to be a little darker, so I just added in a little bit more yellow. For the centers of the flowers, I believe this is Vintage Photo, and again, just cleaning my brush, picking up the watercolor from the pencil using my water brush and coloring the centers of the flower. I decided to also grab, I believe, Walnut Stain to just kind of darken the areas in the center where there already is some dimension from the stamped image itself. And that's all I did. I know it seems like a lot, but just have fun, play with the colors. I think these would look so pretty in pink and blue and purple, not just yellow. I really just wanted to go for an autumn vibe for these cards, so that's why I stuck with the green, brown, and yellow colors for these cards. Now here are the two different border dies to cut out my images. I'm going to show you how I die cut all of these. So my green one, I've decided I'm going to use both of the edged dies and completely cut out my floral. For the Pinecone one, the darker brown ink, I'm going to use just on one side. I'm going to do, in this view, the left side. And then the gold one, I'm going to just die cut on the right side. So I'm using my Spellbinders Platinum 6. This is in collaboration with scrapbook.com. It's off camera, but I'm using my Magic Mat and some of my Spellbinders yellow tape here to keep those dies in place while I run it through my die cut machine. So the dies just line up perfectly around the image, but to make sure it doesn't move while I'm running it through my machine, again, just using that yellow tape to keep it in place. I tend to make sure I don't overlap any tape on my image just in case my paper tears. I don't really have that problem, but I know the one time I put tape where I shouldn't have, it's gonna tear. So now that I'm done with the left side of that die cutout from the Pinecone version of this floral, I went ahead and placed it onto the green so that way I can cut out both sides, and then I will grab that last gold one and I'm putting the right side based on this view, the border die. So again, placing it around the image, reusing that yellow tape because I like to make sure I use my tape up until it's no longer sticky, and then ran that through my die cut machine. So here you can see I have a partial die cut of my gold embossed flowers. I had the partial die cut of the Pinecone brown embossed flowers, and then here are my green. So I didn't quite get it completely matched up on this top leaf here, but that's okay. I took my scissors, trimmed that little bit, and in my bottom like popped right out. So it was perfect cut. Now for these, I'm going to just trim to the edge from where those the die cut line ends, and then I'm going to grab my paper trimmer to help me with cutting the rest so I have some nice straight lines. So I'm going to start with this gold one here. Now the bottom of that leaf is pretty straight, so I'm going to use that with my paper cutter to line up where I want to cut the rest of the bottom of this image. And then I'm going to cut the other long side. I'm going to trim off some of the flower. I had not great embossing right there, so I tried to trim off what was not the prettiest part of my flower, so that was nice. And then I trimmed the top to match up with the top of that die, that leaf there. And I'm going to repeat that process for this one now. So again, lining up the straight part of the leaf die, and then I'm going to cut up the longer side and then rotate it again to cut the top to where it meets where the die ends at the top of that leaf. And now I have two little partial die cut panels for my cards, as well as my green one that is fully cut out. And I want to add a little bit of distressing to make them even more autumny, fall-y. So I grabbed my Vintage Photo Distress ink and one of my scrapbook.com blending brushes, and just going to add on some of that ink around all the edges of every single piece here. So I do all four sides, and I even do a little bit over the flowers just to add in some of that vintage look onto where there's openings in between the flowers and the leaves. I didn't want the paper to look too bright compared to the softness now of these pieces because of the Distress ink. And then I just kind of squished a little bit more ink on my glass mat, sprayed it with some water, and I'm adding some splatter. Again, really want it to give some texture, vintage vibes, and I'm really loving how this is turning out. So now that this is all done, I'm going to set them aside to dry, clean up my desk a little bit, and I'm seeing what my dimensions are for these panels now that I've trimmed them down. They're about they're about 6 by 2.5-ish, so I know that they'll fit perfectly on a mini Slimline card. I grabbed some Fern cardstock from Spellbinders, and I'm going to trim this down to be 6.25 and then 3.25 pieces. So I have 6.25, and now I'm trimming all these down to be 3.25, and I'm going to cut 3 panels for my 3 floral images. Now the plan was to just glue or adhere with some foam adhesive these different panels, and I think the two with, the partial die cut would look really great just like this. But when I placed my floral on the green, the one that was fully cut out, maybe because it was green on green, it just felt kind of bland or blank or empty. So I decided to grab one of my 3D embossing folders from Spellbinders. This is called the Floral Frenzy 3D embossing folder. So I went ahead and added some water to my cardstock piece, because when you use a 3D embossing folder, there's a chance for some tearing because of the pressure, and the water just helps make the paper a little more flexible when you're embossing it. And I really like how this turned out. I think with all 3 it turned out really pretty, but I just wanted a little bit more. So I'm using my Tim Holtz Tonic Deckle trimmer, and I'm going to trim just a tiny bit off of each edge. And now my panels are 6 by 3. So I trimmed off enough that it's a 1/4 inch off of both sides, or like portrait and landscape sides, about 1/8 of an inch from all 4 sides if you want to get real mathematical here. But so now it just has a little bit more texture, and I'm going to make some card bases out of some cream cardstock. So I'm going to trim them down to be 6.5 by 6.25. And the reason why I'm doing that is so I can score along the 6.5 side at 3.25. So my card bases are 6.25 by 3.25, and that way my 3 by 6 deckled trimmed background will fit nicely, and there's a nice even border all the way around that green cardstock. And here's where you can kind of see here like how the layout is going to go. So I went ahead and reinforced all of those score lines on my card bases, and I'm going to use my Super Scotch tape runner. I know I've had some questions in the past where I've gotten it from. I don't think Scotch makes this one anymore. It's like a 1/2 inch adhesive, and if they still do, I think they only make the 1/4 inch tape guns. But anyway, I attached all 3. Now for my panels and my floral images, I want to attach them with some foam adhesive. So I grabbed out my roll of adhesive, and I'm going to trim it to fit nicely behind all of my panels. I went ahead and pulled off all the release paper, and I'm going to make sure that I'm gluing this to the correct side as intended. I want it to be on the left side of the card, so I went ahead and adhered that down. And that will be one of my card panels. Now for this one, I was fully intending on gluing it on the right, but I don't know, something about it. I think it's because I not die cut, but trimmed it a little off with my Deckle cutter. It didn't look good with the card panel in the upper right hand corner. So I just flipped my image over and put it on the left as well. So it looks the same, but it's different because the floral image is upside down compared to the first card. And then finally adding this floral to the 3rd card base. So now that all 3 card bases and the images are attached, everything's done, let's move on to our sentiments. I'm going to grab 3 that I liked the most, and I'm going to stamp them on a scrap piece of that cream cardstock that I made the bases out of, and I'm going to use my Misty here to help me stamp all 3 images or sentiments with Pinecone VersaFine Clair ink. So after I have all 3 of those stamped, I'm going to use the coordinating dies as well as some yellow tape to help keep them in place while I run them through my die cutting machine. Very similar to how I did my flowers. Just going to go through here and find the correct outline dies for these sentiments, and then I will put that tape on and run it through my die cut machine. Once the three of them have been cut out, I'm just going to pop them right out, and then I will grab my brush that I was using for distressing earlier, and I'm just going to take the excess ink and add a little bit ink to the edges around my sentiments. Again, just trying to give it that distressed look, and it won't have like a sharp contrast to the watercolor cardstock when I lay them onto the cards. So I wanted to pop up the sentiments as well, but I already had some foam adhesive on the card. So I'm using these like thinner foam squares from Scrapbook Adhesives and covering the back side of my sentiments. And then I'm going to layer them onto the cards. So I have Hope All Is Well With You on the top left of this card with the gold embossing powder. I have Thank You Friend on the bottom left of my brown embossed florals, and then sending a happy hello for the green. Now, of course, I got to add a little bit more shimmer and shine to my card, so I'm just going to grab this Pops of Color. It is a gloss in the color Chocolate Kiss, and I'm adding 3 little dots to the center of all of my flowers. In order to get more of a domed look than a Hershey Kiss look, I just tap on the inside of the card, and it really creates that nice enamel dot look. Here is a final look at all 3 mini Slimline cards featuring the August 2023 clear stamp and die kits of the month. If dies aren't really your thing, you could also just get the clear stamp set of the month on its own, but I will have a link in my description to all of the different club kits for August. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you'll click like, and if you're new here, I hope you'll subscribe and come back. As always, you can find everything I use down below in the description box. Thank you and have a wonderful day. Bye!